this week was just the first phase in one of the largest environmental trials in U.S. history, which is set to hear testimony for 3 months to determine the share of liability of BP and other companies involved in the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion. Even as we consider the enormous cost of that disaster, you can't ignore that the oil industry plays a big role in the economy of the Gulf Coast. And for the political leaders in the region, this poses a quandary when trying to regulate a profit-driven industry that brings millions of jobs to, well, their constituents. Here's Louisiana Senator Mary Landrieu arguing against closing the tax loophole for the oil industry.
These 5 large oil companies that everybody enjoys beating up on, and I understand that they are making a lot of money today. But this is no reason to go after them, singling them out, particularly because of the 9.2 million Americans that are working in and around and for them, and the thousands of independent companies and suppliers that work in partnership with them.
And that is the tough position I want to ask my next guest about. Joining me for a discussion from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is Buddy Roemer, chairman of the reformproject.org and former Louisiana governor. Hi, Buddy. Always nice to see you.
Hey, Melissa, it's good to be with you.
So, look, Senator Landrieu is not a, all bad guy or all good guy in this. It seems to me that she, like almost everyone else there in Louisiana and Mississippi, Alabama, all along the Gulf Coast, even into Florida, is facing this quandary. How do we expect responsible political leadership when so much of the economy is tied to these oil and gas industries?
Well, the industry was not regulated, Melissa. They talk, but they don't take any action. I've been governor of Louisiana. I've been a congressman from here. I have decent relationships with companies that work to gain energy for us. It's important to America. I don't dismiss that at all. But this speech by Mary Landrieu and others, and she's not the worst of them. Right. I want to be fair to her. Yep. Washington's not broken, Melissa. It's bought. The money that comes in contributions to politicians is a scandal. Now, there is an economic reality here. I think BP is one of the worst players in the Gulf. I said that 25 years ago when I was governor of Louisiana. I'm walking in downtown Baton Rouge the morning of this 5 million barrel spill, and a member of the Department of Natural Resources yells at me, said, "Buddy, did you hear about the blowout in the Gulf?" I hadn't heard about it. I said, "No, but I can tell you who's responsible." He said, "Who?" I said, "British Petroleum." And we both smiled. That's the way it is. And they ought to pay for the claims out there. They ought to pay for the damages. They ought to pay fines. They ought to pay penalties. Yep. They ought to put money set aside, because we don't know what the effect on the wildlife is. Look, I'm a businessman. I run a pretty large bank in the South, and the economic benefits of oil and gas energy is important to our area. Sure. But we ought to ask a simple question. Do we have the courage to regulate them? Do we have the courage to put our children and our animals and our land conditions first? I think we do, Melissa. I think this administration has done a good job the last 2 years of bringing this into focus for the first time in my life.
And Buddy, this point about courage is a real one, because as you point out about the botness of Washington, oil lobbying, gas and oil lobbying dollars since 1990, $238.7 million. We know that about $500,000 to Mary Landrieu herself since 2007. Again, she's just one of many, many people getting this lobbying money. So it really is a question of whether or not you have the political capacity to say no to that money and to start talking about the regulation.
We ought to eliminate lobbyist contributions. We ought to have tax reform, not talking about raising the rates, but doing away with all these loopholes. If you were to do away with these corporate loopholes, you could lower the marginal rate for every American, including the rich people, and they couldn't make a contribution to get a little loophole in the law. You know, in the fiscal cliff thing that we did in December, Obama and the Congress finally did, a big disaster. Do you know, buried in that bill, that bill were hundreds of millions of dollars of additional loopholes for special corporations.
Yep.
It's not right, Melissa. It's called corruption.
Buddy Roemer, you always make it plain, and that's why I always enjoy having you here on MHP. I hope you'll come and join us at the table again soon. And up next, when the price of profit is human lives. More on the oil spill, rather the oil disaster, when we come back.
Slip sliding away. You know, the nearer your destination, the more.
Even before the BP oil spill became an environmental disaster, it was a human tragedy. The 11 men who were killed on April 20th, 2010, when the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded, were more than just workers. To their families, they were fathers and husbands and sons, and no trial or amount of money awarded can fill the void for their loved ones. Back at the table, Sarah and Brenton, Eljoy and Mike. All right, folks, Brenton, this is real. The 11 people died, but then also thousands of workers out of work. How do you replace or make reparation for that?
Well, there's no dollar that you can put on, all that was lost in the Gulf Coast. There's no way you could put a dollar on 11 lives lost, how that impacts families, how that impacts the communities. But we have to also, when you look at the greater impact across the coast, let's talk about the fact that poverty jumped up 33% between the time of the disaster and all the way through 2011. This is an already impoverished region that just suffered a great deal of more in poverty across the Gulf Coast. So now what we're trying to transition to is a restoration economy, where we get the money from BP, and this is why that $45 to $50 billion is so important. So that money comes back, and jobs can be created for environmental restoration. And economists right now are saying that 36 jobs can be made for every $1 million invested in environmental restoration across the coast. This is a chance to really turn the coast around and restore beauty and health.
Right, because this is not a small deal, right? I was looking at this letter to Gulf state governors saying that there are possibly as many as nearly 78,000 new jobs, but those new jobs would be over the course of 50 years. And the fact is, people are, in the short term, they've got families to feed, they've got taxes to pay, they've got all the things they have to do. And in the short term, you say, okay, it's a lot of jobs, but it's over 50 years. How do I right now create an economy that starts to put back to work all of these folks, particularly if we start to pull out those oil and gas jobs, those deep water jobs?
I mean, this is an excellent opportunity to really just start transitioning our economy to a green economy. I mean, we already see the disasters and the havoc that's been wreaked on the environment, on the climate, because of the oil and gas industry. So this is an excellent opportunity, for money to be used to transition, skills so that people can learn how to create the wind farms, the solar panel industries, and really just start to restore the environment. And this is long overdue. I mean, the environment has been completely devastated across the Gulf going back decades, far before the BP oil disaster.
Right. I mean, Sarah, that's one of the things, for those of us who lived through, Isaac recently, or for the folks who were there for Katrina. I mean, this is not just, it is about the ecology, but that ecology impacts human beings at all these different levels.
Integrally. I mean, when you talk about the recreation and tourism industry across the Gulf Coast, you're talking about 640,000 jobs and a $10 billion a year wages for recreation and tourism alone. That's not talking about the oil and gas industry.
Right.
So there is an opportunity here to create a new environmentally restored, environmentally beneficial economy, because the environment in that region underlies the economy. And every dime that BP pays that can go to environmental restoration should go to environmental restoration, because that's economic recovery in the long run. And let me tell you why. The coast of Louisiana, every 38 minutes, loses land the size of a football field to open water.
Yep.
So it's not about a choice between the economy and the environment. You have to have a strong, healthy, resilient Gulf in order to have a strong economy and to protect it from hurricanes like you talked about. I mean, Isaac brought up 565,000 more pounds of oiled material from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So the impacts are there. They're real. You still have dolphins dying in unusually high numbers.
You have shrimp with tumors when the shrimping industry is a key aspect of sort of what sustains those Gulf Coast communities.
That's right. But, you know, there is a silver lining to this. I mean, it's not like we should throw our hands up in the air and walk away from the Gulf. We know that the Gulf is resilient. And if you restore it, if you restore the estuaries, if you address the Mississippi River Delta, create diversions and barrier islands so that you can rebuild land rather than losing land, then you benefit the environment in the long term and the economy in the long term.
But you know, when I hear this argument, it's one that I think the left, you know, the Greens, we say, look, there is a new way to build corporate profits. There's a new way to build a strong and sustainable economy. But there's a lot of sort of eyebrow raising and critique of exactly that argument, particularly on the right. This idea that no, there's insufficient jobs in this way.
Well, I mean, there's a huge amount of unemployment out there. So, you know, this is a great way to get money off the sidelines and get it investing, creating jobs. I think it's worth going back to what Buddy said about the difficulty in regulating this up front. There's a lot of capture, there's a lot of political money, and this is why it's so important to watch this trial, because this is ultimately the last form of regulation we have, right? You know, we have weak enforcement, we have a lot of industry capture of a lot of the regulatory agencies, and the laws themselves are very lax, and they're, you know, dispersed across many states. However, you know, tort law, as you said earlier, but the civil court system is a last chance of redress. And if, you know, and the other thing is that, you know, we're talking about, you know, $20 billion and so on and so forth. It's really difficult to get an accurate measure of the true cost of these things. You know, people will tally up things that they can measure, but human suffering, third order poverty that has skyrocketed as a result of all this industry collapse, that is very difficult to put a price tag on. So no matter what number we put on, you know, I'm sure, you know, especially decades from now when we learn more about the real health and environmental catastrophe, it will always be too small probably.
And I don't want to move too quickly past this for just a second. Explain again, just for folks for whom this might just be a buzz phrase, what regulatory capture is, like why that's a problem in this context.
Sure. So we have very weak laws in terms of regulating offshore drilling, and but the laws need to be enforced. So we have regulatory agencies, people accountable to the public employees, to go out and enforce those laws. Now, a lot of times there's really obvious what's called capture, where the industries end up owning the regulators or telling them what to do. There's obvious things where there's a revolving door where people will go from a regulatory agency to the company, right? There's, you know, there's bags of cash issues, which are real and very important, but there's a much more subtle capture that's much more difficult, where regulators start to essentially identify with the people that they're regulating, that they think more like one of their shareholders as opposed to someone who's supposed to be embodying the public.
It's basically regulatory Stockholm syndrome, right? Where you think more, you think, and therefore the capture. Joy, I think part of what I want to come back to here is Brenton's point about this sense of the human impact that goes on, third order poverty, all of this. Is there a way that we can start reimagining how we call, or whether or not we call a business successful, on something other than their bottom lines, but more on how they contribute to sort of the broader human community in which they find themselves?
I think in society we have to value those corporations and those business owners who look beyond their profits, you know, and we have to hold them up. And this is a critique on our society. You know, we hold up people that make a lot of money and make quick money, and they're billions of dollars, and they have, you know, jets, and we focus everything on how much money they make and how much power they wield, as opposed to valuing the corporations and the small business owners who not only make profit and successful in business, but also are contributors to their local economy, to creating jobs, creating a safe work environment, and being a real contributor to society and community. And we have to do a better job at saying that we value those corporations who see themselves as more as just money makers and how much money we can give our stockholders. And we are a holistic company that cares about our employees, cares about profits, yes, but also cares about our greater society.
Aljo, you just gave me a good idea. You know, we do the foot soldiers on Saturdays. You make me want to do like small business foot soldiers at some point, because I like this idea that we need to reimagine the corporations that we think of as valuable. And we are going to stay on maybe exactly that topic, because there is another big economic narrative about what we need to do and what kinds of companies we should hold up. And it's about that XL pipeline. Remember that? Have we learned nothing at all? When we come back.
As we rebuild our economy, one industry is investing confidently in America's future: oil and natural gas. In communities across the country, we're creating jobs, investing in technology, infrastructure, people, all to produce and deliver more American energy to you. In 2011, we added up to $545 billion through capital investment, wages, and dividends to the U.S. economy. We believe in the promise of America. That's why we're investing right here at home.